Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Beyond Recovery. I'm your host, Matt, and I'm joined today by the owner of Turning Leaves Recovery and the podcast host of Mastering the Drop. Her name is Tricia. Tricia, how are you doing today?
Doing spectacular today. Thank you so much, Matt, for having me here. Couldn't be more overjoyed for this fine Monday morning.
That's wonderful. You know what, you mentioned at time of recording here, you had quite the weekend, and I would love it if you told me a little bit more about that. Because this isn't your typical Monday morning as you normally would have had potentially, Saturday, Sunday to unwind. You were quite busy this past weekend. Forgive my cat in the background there. Her name is Trout, by the way.
My dogs may or may not start barking.
Okay.
Because they are inside because it is raining today.
Okay, there we go.
Yes. I did. I had an amazing weekend. It started midday Thursday, ran all the way through midday yesterday, Sunday. It was for the California Association of Alcohol and Drug Educators annual conference where, wow, just hundreds of people in the recovery world, realm, community come together as professionals or aspiring professionals to continue to elevate the professionalism of the industry. And so I spent the weekend connecting with these folks, but also teaching and training, continuing education, so law and ethics and case management and the continuum of care. And it was just amazing. It was literally amazing.
That's fantastic. It's energized, but at the same token, as you mentioned today, it's nice to have a little bit lighter workload, to be able to recharge, which I'm sure is a big part of, I imagine anyways, a part of your advice for folks in recovery and just in general. So, but I do want to get into this. So let's get into everything you have going on, with clients and everything else. Like, tell us a little bit about Turning Leaves Recovery, please.
Well, Turning Leaves was born out of my own journey. And I'm going to say the significant gaps in service that I noticed as an individual at my season of life, right? I have a really long story. My recovery journey is well over 30 years, or not, I'll call it over 25. My relationship with alcohol and other addictions, such as eating disorders, people-pleasing codependencies, perfectionism, etc., that spanned well over 30 years. In fact, my story starts at the age of 4. My story with chemical substances starts at the age of 12, and runs through roughly 43 years of age. Anyway, so in my final journey into creating what I now refer to as my recovery lifestyle, was, diving into and really experiencing gaps for the person I was and the needs that I had that were very specific to me, and just realizing that, there were things that were missing. So, when I wasn't finding what I needed, I decided to go to school instead. So my first 5.5 years of recovery were spent knee deep in all things psychological in nature around addiction. And I'm talking all addictions, process, behavioral, and chemical in nature. So even my psych degree was heavily focused in that area. I didn't take any useless classes and it all, rounded out into, from human services to, I have probably 13 coaching credentials, as well as a psych degree and counseling credentials that have afforded me this space that I needed to fill my own space, but then now allow me that opportunity to serve people in areas where it is not as difficult as it used to be to find services, but was for sure 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love this story. You know what comes to mind so often, and especially in the case of your story here, is like when you hear the hero's journey tale, right? Where you've gone on this huge journey of self-discovery and figuring out, okay, this isn't the way that this is set up is not working for me, so I'm going to go about it my own way. The lifelong learning type thing, and then being able to then bring that back. So like stage 3 of the hero's journey is like, I've done this development and now I'm going to share what I've learned with others. So really, really cool. I love that, how that's the origin story of it. And we will get into your personal story. I'd love to hear this about your journey that's led you up to this, with the work that you're doing. But before we do that, let's talk about, mastering the drop. I want to hear about your podcast. How long have you been doing it? What are some of the
Oh,
benefits you've had from doing this podcast?
well, Mastering the Drop started out just as a weekly live on Facebook that I would then, also drop into YouTube. It's been probably, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years running. So you can see all the old ones in YouTube. But we recently shifted it into a podcast format, one to accommodate my schedule and and the needing of this space, but also to hopefully reach more people, right? When we see barriers in life, whether that be the algorithm on Facebook or it be something much larger and way more important, right? We have to add, edit, delete, and
Yeah.
find alternatives, right? Like I really never intended to do a podcast.
Hmm.
But for it to reach and touch people in a broader capability, um, we're finding that, having it on, a podcast platform is serving that. Now, again, it's fairly new to the podcast platform. In fact, we're still waiting for Apple or iTunes, I think that's what it's called,
Mm-hmm.
to approve it. But it is on Spotify and it is on Podbean. But anyway, it's where I either come on solo, but most of the time I have a guest, and we're either sharing our experiences with how we use an effective psychological skill set or tactic, or just even a methodology, with the listeners, right? Like how it works for us, just give a broader view and creative space, right? It's a space for creative recovery. Or you know what, we're hearing from somebody either like yourself or another guest, their journey and what their journey was like. So it's mastering the drop, a real view of recovery, so that people can just hear recovery stories, hear successful journeys, um, and gain some knowledge.
It's so important, to hear. For me, for my personal, I can speak for myself, and I'd like your take on it as well. To hear other people's stories, to hear my story and other people's, it was such a relief to me when I first started hearing, somebody saying something that I held with such shame deep inside, and then they would say it. I'm like, oh, you too, like, and it was like this permission to like release that shame and even like compare notes and be like, oh, like I did that too, and kind of have a laugh over it, despite it being like obviously dark subject matter. But just the fact that you're not alone is enough to like, oh, just have a release in this really beautiful way where there's no need for my persona or ego to be involved. And so yeah, like I love that idea of like, bringing other people's stories and journeys. What is your take on that, as in your experience, as far as like sharing stories and such?
Well, I just think it really just highlights and illuminates the fact that as unique amoebas, right? Because we're all unique beings, that we have that autonomy to feel comfortable in our own skin, to feel okay, regardless of whatever challenges or obstacles we're faced with or are moving through or are overcoming or have overcome. um you know there's that space. Society will hear what they've always heard, which is people in recovery like their autonomy, right? Or and their anonymity.
Mm,
And
mhm.
I think that is just such a personal space. Like I don't walk around with a sign that says, hi, my name is, and I'm because one, I don't identify that way, because unless I'm in an active addiction, I'm not anything. I am Trish Parado. and this is who I am, and I've done a lot of living, and I've experienced a lot of things, and along the way I've overcome, sat in, moved through, learned, grown, changed, and evolved. So, I just think that, you know, I think that by listening to and hearing other people's stories, it allows for the normalcy to come through, because it is so normal. I think, one of my favorite signature talks to give as a speaker is why living without habits fixes everything. And it's really a talk that applies to anybody, the person that is, being held hostage by their 6 a.m. spin class, or their day, world, whatever, crumbles and falls apart, to that person that, doesn't feel alive unless they, take a handful of kratom. I don't know, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody's different. And I just think that, we just, we need to see that we're all, unique beings, but that we all have that ability to be living out loud and transparent, if that serves us. But if it doesn't serve us, then that's okay also.
Yeah, I'm loving what I'm hearing. There's a lot of room for like allowing, it's like I get the impression it's yeah, it's a refreshing take where you're mentioning like not being held hostage to habits. So for me, habits were important, initially, like in my early sobriety, early recovery, it was great to have that one, bad habit of searching around for my next drink. And instead I would, start going to the gym. But at a certain point, it was like, I like what you said. I've never heard anybody word it like that, being held hostage to habits. So, you
Cross
know,
addiction's a real thing.
right, right, exactly, right. So that's important, and I love the this is something that Tricia, my story has of late, like they say, the last 6 months has been getting out of just this achiever doer, like everything's a habit, everything's micromanaged, and just coexisting or co-collaborating with the universe instead of having this ego driven need to like try and attempt to control every aspect of my life. So I'm really liking what I'm hearing from you. It's very well bodied and well developed. So really cool that you talked about that. A couple other things that came up, and then we'll definitely get into your personal story. When you're talking about the like the behavioral addictions or the codependency and things of that nature. For me, it was like, I believe it's a Gabor Mate statement, is like, okay, what is the reason behind that I have this drinking habit in the first place? And I didn't understand that, until deep into my recovery. I had definitely done the habit transfer, which was great. It was going to the gym as opposed to drinking, so much healthier. In the meantime, though, I was still pushing all those feelings down. So yeah, I'm interested just on your whole take about that and how that came up in your life and how you were able to get through some of these behavioral addictions or patterns that you'd had.
Well, I learned about a very specific theory, and it really illuminated a lot for me in about myself and my life, but also that very thing that we're talking about: process behavioral, chemical addictions, and people. And how we operate, right? We are all born in what is considered the external locus of control position, right? We're reliant on other people to put a bottle in our mouth if we're hungry, change our diaper, dress us, feed us, bathe us, right? And as we grow, we're to be moving into a more internal locus of control. We start tying our shoes, et cetera, et cetera. However, in our conditioning process and in the modeling process, we learn other things, such as, and bear with me if this sounds a little odd to you, but think about when you would fall down and scrape your knee, right? Generally speaking, you got something while mom was pouring the Bactine or whatever, cleaning it, whether that was a popsicle, a lollipop, whatever. You go to the doctor, you get your vaccines if that's something your family did. I'm older, right? So I'm a 70s baby, early 70s. We have vaccinations. When you go get your vaccinations, the doctor would hand you, or the nurse would hand you, a lollipop.
Right.
Whenever I went to the dentist and had a filling, I got to dig through a goodie box, right? It's our birthday, we get cake. We get presents. Geez, when it's Christmas, it's not even our birthday. We get goodies, right? We get things. So we start to learn how to assign an emotional purpose to things outside of us. We become reliant on things outside of us to bring us peace, joy, comfort, relief, value. This could be other people, value, validity, worthiness, right? We're now reliant on, what does society think about this? How is society going to measure up the clothes I wear, or the weight that shows on my scale? How is what is somebody else's opinion of, right, my thoughts or feelings? Like, I got to go seek this approval and validation because my own sense of validity, right, relies on it. And so we are conditioned to be this way. And so when we're an addict and we rely, and actually not everybody's an addict. Let me just take that back, because it's something we talked about heavily this weekend. Just because you're having a problem with alcohol doesn't mean you're an alcoholic, right? So, and that's one of those gaps in service, right? Where people are like, I, just really need to fix my relationship with alcohol, right? Like that emotional purpose I give it. And that could be the level of stress has gone drastically up through the pandemic period. So my drinking has gone drastically up because it's the only stress reliever I have, right? Like, I know I can have an appropriate relationship with alcohol. I've done it forever, my whole life. But suddenly I see myself in this space. Now, when you have that physiological piece where it's like you got your maintenance drinker where physically I can't go without, or I'm going to be sick, crash, seize, whatever, like that's a whole different level. But it's still, there's an emotional purpose, there's a reliance upon, and that's where we want to do that changing, that shifting, because we really don't need to rely on anything to bring us peace, joy, comfort, relief, value, validity, or worthiness. It's about moving into a true internal locus of control position. And that doesn't mean we don't consider other things. That doesn't, it doesn't mean we remove emotion from all things, but so there's a really good balance. And when we learn the right psychological skill sets and tactics that go along with that, then it serves us immensely. In fact, it was, again, life-changing, pivotal ground for me. When I stepped into this way of beingness.
So fascinating, and thank you for going. There's lots of great stuff there. What were some of the things that do allow you to or promote you to be able to do this like internal focus? Is it through like mindfulness practice, meditation? How did that show up for you? What did you have to practice essentially to be able to get to that stage?
I had to learn exactly how I was hearing, seeing, feeling, and believing about myself, right? It means that you have to take this super deep dive into multiple categories that create you, right? Social, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. There's a list of them, and we look at each category and we examine, how you're really experiencing that, and you get to know yourself and how you hear. But you also have to really look at how you're communicating with yourself, right? I dove in and it's like, what does that dialogue look like? And so I shift everything more into a preference, because I had to ask myself, like, how do I see myself experiencing living, right? And then it was, how do I want to experience my environment? Okay. How do I want my environment to experience me? Right. So we're looking at these things, and having to step into what I call a true assertiveness, right? Living in a true assertiveness. So for me, and what that looks like is stepping into open, honest, genuine, transparent, and authentic communication in all things that I do, whether that's with myself or with other people, right? I have to look at how I'm going to handle things, right? So that's creating a huge slowdown, even though when people watch me, I'm going like this, but this is going at a different pace, because it's important to me that I'm responsive in all things that I do. There is no knee-jerk reactivity. There is no impulsivity. Everything is very thoughtful, right? Like if I'm going to sit down and eat a dessert, because part of my story is my relationship with food. If I'm going to sit down and eat a dessert, I have to make sure of a lot of things. I have to make sure that I'm not going to beat myself up afterwards. I have to make sure I'm not going to restrict, to make sure I'm not going to get on the scale. I have to make sure there's not an emotional purpose for what I'm about to do. And, right? But because 10 years in the making, it's really quick for me because I've conditioned it as my new way of being, which means I undid all of the preconditioning from earlier in life, right? Like my first 26 years has been completely undone. And it's been I cultivated, right? I explored and dove in and created new distress tolerance, created new emotion regulation. And again, so it's mindfulness, it's CBT, DBT, right? Cognitive behavioral, dialectical behavioral, but it's all stuff that I can do within me. I don't need somebody else to do it with me anymore because it's embedded. It's my new code. It's my new code, right? Like my new wiring. And so I have a new way of coming to resolution in all things, whether that's other relationships, right? Like I can say I have this really great relationship with this person. However, these three topics we cannot talk about because it would then be toxic to our relationship. And I have a way of bowing out of that, right? Like it might sound like, I'm not going to have that conversation with you, right? Like I totally respect, and accept your stance, but I'm going to choose not to engage, right? Because our relationship is far too important to me. And that just says, I accept you the way that you are. We don't have the same opinion, belief, whatever it is. And I think it's better that way we can leave the things out of our relationship that might cause that relationship strain. There's a lot, right? There's a lot that goes into it. It's, for all intent and purposes, I usually will explain it. It's the emotional intelligence we didn't know we didn't have, but need to experience living in a way that is fulfilling, lifelong, manageable, and maintainable.
Wow. Yeah. A lot that could literally be an entire episode basically on that subject, which we may have to do at some point. I love it though. That's great. I'm hearing it like you say. It's 10 years in the making for yourself, like you being your own guinea pig essentially of figuring this out, and now you're teaching this to other people. What I'm hearing you saying, a key component that really jumped out to me when you were talking was that it's inside your own head and your brain slows down, right? So you have to. I'm picturing like making sure that my breath stays, it keeps me in the parasympathetic, right? So I'm not panicking and all those fragmented thoughts, and very methodically going through organizing your thoughts, organizing my thoughts to okay, and then going through almost like this checklist, which initially might be a little, as with anything, will be a little bit clumsy, a little bit, there's going to be some room for error and growth, as with anything that you've learned, especially that has some bad habits beforehand, the conditioning that you talked about. And then from there, it just sort of speeds up and becomes automatic, right? So, but when you said it, just really jumped out to me that it's slowing down in here. It's about slowing down and being really methodical and giving yourself the space
Purposeful.
to be able to, purposeful. There's the word. Exactly.
Purposeful, thoughtful, meaningful.
Yeah, all great words. Fantastic, really fascinating things. I want to get into your story now. We've had a good chunk of exactly what you're doing. You got a preview. Obviously just sort of the tip of the iceberg. I'm gathering from everything you're saying here. There's so much meat on the bone that we could get into. But let's get into your story. I want to hear about your origin story. What was your relationship? You've had some hints in some of the responses, but I want to give you the open floor just to tell us all the highlights and we'll say learning opportunities that you've had along the way.
Well, I think, in my infamous wisdom about myself, because I cared enough to get to know myself, levels that most people would fear going is that, I said, my journey started at the age of 4, and I can say that that was when I experienced my first sexual assault. And at that time, I can look back, and at the age of 4, I already felt disempowered to say anything, right? This is a story that nobody in my family even knows, right? Like my parents, both my parents that were raising me at the time are gone. My adult siblings don't need to know, right? Like all of these things. And so I experienced that. But the reason where that message came that nobody was going to hear me, believe me, or whatever, like it was pointless to even try to say anything, even though I knew that what happened was wrong, was because I had already begun hearing at that age that nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. And the reason for that is, I was born a highly intellectual being. I was reading, writing, doing arithmetic, and playing chess by the time I was 4 years old. And maybe that's not, amazing for other people listening, but for me in my generation or in my era and inside of my family, inside of my unit, it was huge. And so when a 4-year-old can carry a conversation with her siblings that are 8, 9, and 10 years older than her, and be able to hold their own, it's intimidating. So, I heard that message quite a bit, but, I just remember always feeling like perfectionism was something that needed to happen. So at 5.5, I decided I wanted to start playing classical piano, and of course went overboard with that. And I was competitively swimming before I was the age of 7. And so there was this need and this pressure to perform. And I was very meticulous, like everything had to match from head to toe. And, everything had to be just so. And then I started experiencing more traumas. And in that, I witnessed my dad being struck by lightning. That was, very traumatic. And I had this deep, deathly fear of the dark. And so that would cause me panic. And it was all things that I felt like I couldn't talk about or share about, because then I would be less than perfect. And, just kind of fast forwarding, when my dad was killed when I was 12 in a freak motorcycle accident, I was looking around and I was watching the adults, and I already knew what alcohol was. I was allowed to have small amounts of wine in 7-Up at dinner on occasion. And, so I knew what it was, and dad always let me walk by and sip his beer. Like it wasn't something new. But when he died and I noticed all of, the adults, damn, I'm like, I can't talk. I want to just isolate. I was in shock. I was all of these things, and everybody was drinking, smoking, and able to smile and share. So I'm like, whatever. I picked up a 6-pack and a pack of cigarettes and went and hung out with my cousin, and it worked. And it was kind of on from there as far as my relationship with alcohol. Like it had an emotional purpose. And through the years, I experienced a lot of other, traumatic events. There were numerous sexual assaults, domestic violence, emotional abuse, emotional neglect, that carried on throughout my life until I was about the age of 26. And then there was a lot of good stuff too, right? Like, so I wasn't, I had, some really low bouts with alcohol, a couple DUIs. And I would have those traumatic nights where, arguments with partners or the domestic violence would kick in. But I also was a mom, right? And so, and had shared custody. So most of the ugliness happened when, my son wasn't with me. And so I had like this whole split life. And it was really hard to manage, because I also was a very, again, high achieving. I had a great career, was super young, right? Like this young 19-year-old running like a whole printing plant. Anyway, and balancing that, being 19 and, hanging out in this man's world of, printing and marketing. So there was always a lot of drinking and things in my life. So, but I was always able to reel it in, right? I was always able to reel it in. Then I met my husband, and we together have 5 children. I met him, and I actually kind of forgot about my anorexia and my negative relationship with food and that control need in there. But I started to heal and change from the anorexia and body dysmorphia when I was 26. Then I met my spouse at when I who wasn't then but is now my spouse. We met when I was 27, and I really started to learn how to accept unconditional positive regard in my life. And so, that the relationship with alcohol, that need for it, that emotional purpose that it had been given, which was for sadness, disparity, fear, all of that, which was where my high levels of drinking happened. There was always daily drinking. That just was always there, but it was, so I went to the daily drinking, and it kind of ebbed and flowed through the years, but had a few near-death experiences. Had a major surgery. One of our children had, we experienced a very traumatic event there with leukemia and bone marrow transplant, and just things that as a family we had to rally around and do, and and when that came out the other side, there's always that release, right? And especially when you're in control mode. And so during that period, there was a lot of control with my alcohol, like, because I had to be back and forth, and I had to be, good for the whole family, because I'm a very big codependent people pleaser, be the fixer, all of that. So when that was over, and then the kids started moving out, the empty nest really, really affected me. I developed generalized anxiety disorder, and probably had it all along. If we get down to it. Anyway, my doctor, who knew I was a daily drinker, right? A low level daily drinker, right? I'm like, I drink 3 to 6 beers every day, right? Every day, 7 days a week without fail, right? Like, I drink every day. And she knew this, but prescribed me Xanax anyway. And, I knew, like, you don't pop a Xanax and drink a beer together. Like, I knew that. But what I didn't know was the scientific pieces behind it. So we fast forward 5 years, and I'm still being prescribed freely Xanax. My tolerance, right? Synergistically, they exacerbated each other. So my tolerance to alcohol continued to grow, and my tolerance to Xanax continued to grow. Although I never did exceed my prescription for Xanax, right? I was able, in fact, she would want to give me higher doses, and I'd say no. Keep me at the little half dose, right? The little 0.5, whatever. I can control it from there for myself. But I would always know. But then as anyway, so it just got to a point where, like, I was actually able to, consume an 18-pack as a maintenance drinker without anybody realizing that it was that much. Like, I'd have to exceed that for anybody to even really, notice the difference. Not in that I seemed sober, but that it was different than the 3 to 6, right? And it just, I got scared. I'll just be honest. I got scared. I couldn't quit. For the first time in my life at 43, I couldn't stop on my own. I couldn't take a 6-month break. I couldn't even take a day break, right? The physiological withdrawal would set in. So I was at this, I had to, and then I could feel my liver working. My hands would shake, I'd be nauseated. And I was just like, this is, for a control freak, this isn't okay. Right? There was nothing wrong in my life. Our family unit was great. Physiologically, for the first time in my life, I had lost all control. And so that's what landed me in a medical detox. That's what landed me in a 30-day program. And that's what led me to round out my recovery journey that I didn't realize had started back at 26 years old, when I decided I was going to, do what I could to get out of the anorexia, right? Still, and I've uncovered so many things with that I didn't do correctly. There was still so many things with the pressure to, that there was still restricting there, it just wasn't at the same level, right? Again, there's levels of severity. And I've just been so fascinated to watch and monitor them or observe them through my past, and see how they ebb and flow, and using myself as like my primary case study, because I had so many years that I could study and watch those levels of severity ebb and flow in so many different periods of life. Um, Even when it was in drug experimentation, right? In the 80s, I had a period where I experimented with methamphetamine. I tried marijuana. None of them worked for me. The only one that actually worked for me was alcohol, and benzos. I mean, opiates, they were worthless, right? They never did anything for me. But so all of these periods, like, it was so interesting to watch the process, the behavior, the chemicals, all of it ebb and flow throughout my life. Every time, like, I thought I was doing better, right? Put down the alcohol for 6 months. There were periods where I put down the alcohol for 3 years. But I can see now what things I put in its place. And it was always something else, right? Fitness. I started bodybuilding. I became a trainer. Just a lot of things. And there was always something that I had to replace it with. I don't have anything anymore that I have to feel peace, joy, comfort, relief, value, validity, or worthiness. It all comes from within me. Like, I am okay. Even if I say, scrap my calendar for the day, I'm just going to lay here, I'm totally down with that, right? Like, it's okay. Over the weekend at this conference, everybody was getting ready to watch, sober comedians. Everybody was going to have, go off campus, if you will, and go eat together in these big groups, yada. Peace out, going to bed, right? Like, they're like, it's 6 o'clock. I'm like, that's cool beans. I need quietness, right?
Yes.
Like, I need to give back to myself right now. And in that means it's time for me to withdraw myself from the situation. Go have fun, right?
Yes.
Anyway, I
Yeah.
could talk for hours. My story is super long. That was probably just like one of the shortest surfacey versions I could probably give you.
No, that's great. Yeah. Again, though, yeah, as we get further in this interview, it's pretty apparent we could do like a mini series just on various subjects, including your story, right? But it's great. The things that come up in your story for me is, and what we touched on earlier, just to circle back earlier in the interview about like the transfer of addiction and addictive behavior, right? And you mentioned the bodybuilding, and it's I get the impression that's like this, yeah, like the fixer energy, like the achiever energy, and all this never got or hadn't gotten a reprieve up into a certain period, and the real work was to get into that. And that's what we sort of discussed as you being your own case study and really getting into that. And you also mentioned a quote that stood out to me when we started, is like, you went into spots with yourself that a lot of people are afraid to do, or perhaps hesitant to, or both, a little bit of both, right? As far as that goes. And you, again, with the work that you've done with yourself, there's so many layers to that. So when was there, I'm guessing from what you're saying, or inferring that it was just a lengthy process, and you're not viewing it as having a finish line per se. But when was it there? Was there a specific instance where you're like, okay, this transfer of energy into, like, albeit healthier habits is still not serving me. There's still something that's not quite, sitting well with me. Was there, the equivalent of a rock bottom moment with that specific thing, the behavioral traits that led you into the work that you're doing, or was it just sort of this gradual curiosity that picked up over time?
There's so many different ways I can answer that question. Um, the, when I decided I was going to, to create this, and go down this journey, one of the things was, I noticed a significant piece of me that didn't match what I wanted to see or feel, and that was what I call being in the stance of a judger.
Okay.
And it was through that work that I really uncovered the greatness of the work that I do today, helping thousands of others do the same, right? And so you think about just being out in society, right? Think about driving in your car down the highway or freeway or whatever it is you call it, right? Born and raised in Southern California. So when I was doing this work, I was actually commuting from a 50-mile commute to go to school in
Wow.
Southern California. So a lot of freeway time. So it allowed me, but it also it actually illuminated a lot for me, because when you're driving down there, there's a lot of, hurriedness. So when somebody would be tailgating me, my propensity was to step on the brake, right? Judge her. And go into that stance of who the heck do you think you are, trying to keep it clean there, right? Like, who the heck do you think you are,
Mhm.
right? Like, don't encroach on my world, right? Like, think. Um and so I'd get into that stance of a judger, or I would notice myself judging other people's appearance or their mannerisms or their thoughts or their beliefs or their views and opinions, and I would judge it negatively anytime that it didn't match or mirror my own or fit into my game plan. And
Mm.
so I'll go back to the car thing, right? So I started looking at that, and I decided that being in the stance of a learner, right? Because I was learning about myself, was so much softer, kinder, and gentler. So in times where you don't have the opportunity to inquire for deeper understanding, like I wasn't going to pull over and ask the guy, like, "Hey, can you share with me
Yeah.
why you're tailgating?" Like I
Yeah.
I wasn't going to do that. That would be highly dangerous and just
Yeah.
ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But in my head, it was, you know what? I don't know this person, right? Again, go back to, my life motto, which is, this is my life too. It gets to look, feel, be however I want it to. I get to choose. So I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, there's this guy behind me, right? That is clearly in a hurry. I don't know what's happening for him. I'm going to move over and let him go by,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And just wish him well, because I don't know. Sure, he could be, could have stayed out late on Sunday night. He could be hungover and in a rush for a meeting he's late to, and it could for sure be self-induced, you know, stress. Or guess what? It could also be that his kid just got hit by a train and he's frantically trying to get to the hospital to be with him before he goes into surgery.
Mm.
In that case, I want to get out of his way
Mm.
as a parent, as a loving, caring, being, right? So I choose to say it's none of my business, right? What's happening in there. Like, I would notice, right? Driving down the freeway on a weekend, right? Everybody be going around this car, right? And there's two different versions to this, right? So when it became my turn to go around the car, my usual MO would be to come up next to them and do what everybody else was, throw the mad dog, like, hey, get out of the fast lane. Instead, I looked, and one time it was a husband and wife out on a Saturday drive, thoroughly enjoying each other, laughing, smiling, having a good time. And I'm like, hell, I wish that was me right now. Right?
Mm.
Like, and guess what? They're going 65, which is the speed limit. If we all don't know the definition of that word, we should pull up the dictionary. I get it. None of us drive that speed. And yes, it is slow for the fast lane, but that's because of our choice, not
Mhm.
necessarily the law, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then the other time was my turn to go around, and I looked, and it was somebody who appeared to be roughly in their early 80s, who had an oxygen tank next to him. It was in their nose, but they were driving. And it was a small town area. It was on a highway. They were in the slow lane, right? They were going probably 55, right? Just trying to exercise their right to have the autonomy to maintain some activities of daily living for themselves, right? Just
Yeah.
trying to have that capability of not relinquishing all things. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't driving dangerously. 55 in the slow lane on a 2-lane highway. Go around him, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
let him have that. Like, how much, I don't know, right? I was like, wow. So when I learned to really watch my judger stance
Mm.
and how to get into that stance of a learner, it improved my relationship with myself, right? Now I could dive deeper, right? Help me understand. Why do you feel believe that way? Where are those thoughts coming from? Where are those feelings coming from? Where did they derive from? You know, how long ago did they originally belong to you, or did they come from somebody else and you've just adopted them and taken ownership of them, right? Like, let's take some stock in your inventory. And then I was able to offer it to every other being on the planet that I came into contact with. You know, if I didn't like what I was hearing, one, it was my choice. What filter am I listening it through, right? If I have my boundary system, which for me, boundaries are different. It's a filtration system. It's something that protects me and the people around me and my environment, right? So am I filtering it properly? Am I using the right filter? Am I seeing through the right lens that allows this to stay in a productive, proactive, effective space? And that allows me the ability to clarify or confirm that I'm even understanding the person correctly. Like, we read these text messages, and we assign our own perceived tone of voice to them,
Yeah.
right? Like, hey, I can't believe you did that. Or, I can't believe you did that. Two totally different things, but if you're reading it, you get to choose. How about clarifying, like, before I read this, right? Before I answer this, I want to make sure I'm reading this with the right tone and inflection in my voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, are you, sorry if my dog's barking. Are you upset at something that I did or said? Or are you feeling excited about something that I did? Right? Because I need more input before I know how to respond. Otherwise, I'm just being reactive and assuming.
Yes. That's so important. I love it. I love it. So taking that judgment stance, and taking a more of like a learner. There's more details to be had. Yeah, so good, so good. Okay, I thought you were. Yeah, I'm like, we're gonna have to
No, I just want
do some
to.
ad lib here. No, that's great. That's all good with the dogs. My dogs are. It's right around mailman time, so you might hear my dogs as well. They might meet yours apparently, but yeah, such great stuff here, Tricia. That's amazing, amazing, amazing stuff. I love the work that you're doing here, and I could talk to you all day. I want to be respectful for your time though as well. We'll perhaps look at a part two. And I was, as I I had mentioned it before we got started, potential collaboration on your podcast. I would love to come on and talk about my journey.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, just what, as we wind it down here, and then you can go see your dogs there as well. Two quick questions. Where can we find you online? What's the easiest way to reach out to you if if somebody's listening to this and going, "Wow, this is really
I'm going to
landing
be
with me"?
honest. The quickest, easiest way is to go to turningleavesrecovery.com. That's LEAVES, turningleavesrecovery.com. In the top right hand corner, in fact, you'll even see a little video of me saying, hey, let's just have a conversation. There's a button at the top that says have a conversation. Click it. I'll show up. You put it on my calendar, I'll show up.
Cool.
And that is probably the quickest, easiest way. You can subscribe or whatever and go the roundabout way, but I'm pretty easygoing person to talk to.
Absolutely.
That's probably my best recommendation.
Back. Okay, for sure. I'll throw that in the show notes. And my final question, you did bring it up. I believe it. I imagine it's one of your core values, or it's up there, anyways. I like to end with this particular question: what does authenticity or being authentic mean to you?
Mm. Um, well, again, it goes into that transparency, right? That genuineness, um, and just being honest, but living a life in integrity, morally and ethically. Um, and so, if I'm pretending to be something I'm not, if I'm not open, honest, and genuine, um, then I'm not being authentic. I'm pretending to be something else. So I try to be in beingness
Mm,
um all the time, right? So for me, it's not about changing um the self, right? Like I didn't change. It wasn't about changing everything about who I was. It was about changing how as a being I showed up.
ooh.
And so, you know, it's just important, right? Like you'll never, I don't know. I just don't know how to be anything else other than to show up with who I am authentically at any given moment, right? Like, hey, I'm burned out, but I'm here, right? Like,
Mm. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, so I believe that, you know, there's a beauty in being authentic. So if I try to be something that I'm not, I can't even figure out what's not authentic, right?
That's
Like I just
yeah.
don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
I used to know, but I just don't even know anymore, right? Like everything that I do is authentically me.
I love it. That's a great place to end it. Tricia, thank you so much for your time today. We'll talk to you
Thank
soon.
you.
Thank you.